Hi, friend. If we haven't yet met, I'm Leah Simon. I'm the founder of The Box Co. and the creator of The Comeback Box. And I started this series to really make self-growth approachable, attractive to everyone. And today we are unboxing Emotional Healing with Sam Qurashi. I am so excited for you to meet him. Sam was a psychiatric resident at an addiction hospital where he worked with over 10,000 patients. And now he's really on a mission to research the mind. And he's talking to experts from the horse whisperer and the Iceman to a ninja and a pickpocket, really just to identify what are the psychological patterns that we have and how can we interrupt them, because as Sam says, we're really the ones designing them. So I'm so excited for you to meet him, and I think he's joined. Just waiting.
Yes.
Hello.
Hold on. Can you hear me?
Okay, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. I can hear you
Perfect.
perfectly.
Perfect. Perfect. How have you been?
I'm good. It's been a few months.
It
It's
has
good to
been.
see you face to face.
It's good to see you too. I'm
Yeah,
really excited about today.
I am too. I am too. How was your trip to the UK?
It was smooth. It was quick, and I'm now trapped in my apartment for the next 6 days. So I can't leave. I only have two trips outside. Day two, day five, as I was telling my audience a couple minutes ago. So day two and day five for taking, well, day two, day five, day eight, but day five is when I do the test to release, which is an optional thing. So I pay for it so I can take the test.
Okay.
And as soon as I get the result, I'm able to leave because we're supposed to quarantine here for 10 days. And I don't want to quarantine for 10 days.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm gonna cross my fingers for your test.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, hopefully it's going to be, I mean, I'm here, I'm alone, so I don't
Well,
think
and
yeah, virus will be sneaking in anytime soon.
okay.
So, yeah,
Okay. And you have all your supplies?
everything,
Okay.
everything.
All
Yeah.
right. Wonderful. Um, so I was saying, I don't know exactly when you joined, that we're going to be talking about unboxing emotional healing today. And thanks to everyone who's already joined. For anyone who hasn't met you, Sam, I gave a brief introduction, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your background and what's gotten you into this really interesting work that you're doing these days.
Okay, so short version. I
Okay.
used to be a psychiatric resident in an addiction hospital. I spent over 7 years during that time. I've seen over 10,000 patients. And as I was basically treating patients, I noticed things about the system that hindered my ability to connect with people, to help them. And I noticed that they benefited more from the attention I gave them or the attention I offered more than the medication itself. So I started focusing on education over medication and trying to find different ways of understanding the mind. So one thing is I decided to leave because I wanted one to many rather than just one to one. I wanted to reach more people and I wanted to find a better way. So I started interviewing different experts who live beyond the frame of psychology. And you mentioned several of them. And it's really about identifying through a different lens. A lot of people talk about, for example, well, everybody focuses from their own perspective. And if you look at for example, imagine a tree in front of you and you were a physicist, how would you look at that tree? You would look at it from a physicist's standpoint. You're going to look at as the leaf is falling, you're going to look at it through the lens of, okay, gravity, acceleration, flow, resistance. If you were a chemist, you're going to look at the biochemical reaction that led to the breaking of the leaf, the degradation as it hits the soil. If
Right.
you were an artist, you would look at it from, an artist's perspective, the elegant dance, the flow as it descends, the colors. But what if you were a physicist and a chemist and an artist? How would you look at that leaf? You're going to see it through three different lenses and perspectives simultaneously. And you may see something no one else can see, make a connection no one else can make, and solve a problem no one else can solve. And to me, I think the mind is the biggest problem that we haven't yet solved. And so I wanted to learn from different perspectives, to borrow these lenses, to put them on and stack them in order to see something that I may not have been able to see as a psychiatric resident, that anyone was able, that no one was able to see, by seeing it through multiple perspectives simultaneously. And here we are. Instagram was an accident. I wanted to start a podcast. I wasn't thinking of Instagram. But because I suspended my podcast, I started focusing on Instagram. Now the podcast is probably coming back real soon, but Instagram just blew up. People responded massively. You have people that were suicidal that are no longer suicidal, people that were just cutting themselves that no longer are, and just from a single video or a single quote. And what this showed me is the power of a single word.
Yeah.
The power of a message, the power of a quote, an idea. Mm-hmm. And so the whole page is really designed to interrupt psychological patterns, to provoke people to think differently, to see things differently, and to raise awareness. Because emotional healing is, and this is based on everything that I've researched, and I was focusing a lot on behavior. I was focusing on verbal and nonverbal communication, and I still share that. But emotional healing is at the heart of self-development, which is the most neglected part. Emotional healing is not necessarily properly focused on in medicine, in therapy specifically, as much as it can be in the way that would accelerate it. And so that became my focus. So it's still the mind, it's still communication, language, but they all come together with awareness for emotional healing.
Well, I love that, Sam. And I would absolutely adore listening to a podcast by you. I mean, I love your words. I love your imagery and just everything you expose us to. And I love listening to you. I find your voice just extremely calming and soothing. So I think a podcast would be amazing.
I'm definitely going to do that now. I was delaying it, but after what you said, it has to happen really soon.
Yeah.
So thank
you. It's a magical voice.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So lots of engagement and comments, and I just want to acknowledge what everyone is saying. They're sending you lots of love from all over the world. I have seen some requests. So just before they get buried, let me see. Someone was asking about rejection in terms of Biasma was asking at some point if we can talk about rejection and looking for external validation and how to heal from that. And I'll make a note of that as well. Okay. So where shall we begin? I think, emotional healing, such a big topic. And maybe if we try to begin at this start, maybe it's talking about how we even know that we need to do some emotional healing work, how we recognize that there is something that's maybe broken, might be the wrong word, but to know that we need to do some work with that. Do you have a POV on that?
I was interviewed about 3 months ago on a podcast. I don't think it aired yet. I don't think they uploaded it yet. But one question was about what I went through, so my personal experience. And one thing I mentioned, because there were things that happened to me that were devastating, crippling. And that was another motivation as to why I wanted to do this. What's interesting is when I left my practice, something happened in my life that shattered me to a million pieces. That's how I perceived it. And that increased the motivation to find this, because I never wanted anyone to feel what I felt. So one thing I basically realized was I thought that I was broken for a very long time until I realized I was just wounded. We're never broken. We're just wounded, and we just need to heal the wound. That's it. But we need to identify what the wounds are. And once we do, that's it. You're lifted and you're free. So to answer your question, how do we know? I would say if you are triggered by any words or any person or any actions, if there is a triggering experience that you have, like if somebody said something and you feel triggered, you feel an extreme, intense emotional reaction that you may feel, but not to that level, with someone else. Or you may feel different emotions. Let's say I feel anger, sure. I feel sadness, I feel envy, whatever the emotions are, whatever we feel. There is a level that we know, if we're honest with ourselves, we know that that's appropriate. That's not excessive. That's not exaggerated. That's not intense. It's not an emotional roller coaster that you cannot control or contain. Something that is extremely overwhelming, that could be linked to something specific that keeps coming up. It's not a one-time thing. So for example, an emotion that you're going to feel very strongly is if you lose a loved one, if a family member that you love so much, that means a lot to you, passes, you're going to feel an intense emotion you haven't felt before. That's not necessarily something that you normally feel or experience. That is a trauma. That is a moment of that's not a trigger as much as it's a trauma that may lead to an existing trigger that reminds you of that if you don't heal it. So I would say an intense, extreme, exaggerated, repetitive experience, emotional experience that you feel over and over and over. Like if you constantly feel intensely frustrated, I promise you, you don't just feel it with one person. And if I were to talk a bit about triggers, if someone says something to you and it really triggers you, and you feel, let's say, frustrated, let's go for frustration. Okay. You could, the strategies that people use, number one, they would either suppress it, which a lot of people do. Okay, I just want to suppress it because I want to keep that relationship. I don't want to upset them. I don't want them to misunderstand me. They probably didn't mean it. Let me just keep it inside. Mm-hmm. And most likely it will repeat. One, because they don't know what they did was something upsetting to you, so they're not going to stop because you didn't tell them. And two, even if you did tell them and they continued, you haven't truly processed the emotions because that's not the first time you felt it. Some people would cut the person out of their life. Some people would threaten the person, warn the person, like if you dare say that again, I will do whatever. Yeah. Some people will just have a dialogue of explaining how they feel in hopes of the change, which is great. But the thing is, most of the strategies of coping with what someone says or does to you is basically trigger management, not emotional processing. You didn't get rid of the button. You didn't get rid of the emotional landmine. What you're telling people is, please stop pressing this button that I have. Or you can cut them out of your life so they no longer are in your life to step on that. But here's the problem. They're not going to be the last person to come into your life to step on it. They weren't the first. The reason why you have this button is because you were traumatized at some point that now you have the trigger. Everyone has been traumatized in some way or form. It doesn't have to be attributed to witnessing a crime or witnessing something or experiencing something. But everybody has been traumatized in some way or form. And the moments you are triggered are an opportunity for you to identify the trauma or the emotional impact of a trauma so you can process that. Mm-hmm. And if we work on emotional processing instead of trigger management, the emotional processing would eliminate the trigger and it will no longer need to exist. And you don't have to get rid of the person, but when you operate and you behave in any way or form in front of that person, it will not be fear-based. It will not be, please stop what you're doing to me. It's a choice and it's not emotional based. You just don't appreciate being spoken to that way. but you're not operating out of desperation and need and fear, because that button has been taken away and no one has the power to do that anymore. And that's why intimate relationships are so powerful. It's the best. It's interesting how friendships can reveal triggers, but nothing compares to intimate relationships, because it's so personal, it's so sensitive, it's so close, and it is an opportunity for both sides to work to reveal to the other person without them knowing. When two people step into a relationship, they're basically holding a mirror, reflecting the other person the thing that they need to work on. If you're triggered by your partner, there's something you need to work on. This is not to say, and I want to emphasize it, this is not to say, because I know a lot of people would say, so are we basically enabling the predator, the abuser? No. We're freeing the victim from victimhood, and then the victim becomes a hero that can stop the villain if the villain doesn't stop, instead of just constantly trying to attack the villain while the victim remains a victim. This is the problem with acceptance and enabling, and in the world right now, we have a lot of people that are accepting things, and acceptance is important as long as it doesn't turn into enabling. We don't want to enable someone to feel victimized and stay victimized. Yes, we need to stop the bullies. Yes, we need to stop the abusers, but not to the degree, not in a way that keeps the victim a victim. They need to be empowered. That's a whole nother topic. That's a very deep rabbit hole, but I hope this answers your question as a starting point about triggers.
Yes, and I love this distinction about trauma and trigger. And there is what's happening. The way I'm hearing it is there's what's happening, which can be the trauma, but there's what already happened, the existing button or trigger that it's pushing. And you talked a bit about making sure that you're not blaming someone else or thinking that it's someone else, this reason that you're triggered. So how do you know when, if you get triggered, you feel these emotions, how do you identify when that's inner work that you need to do around a trigger, or whether that's a conversation? I feel like it could be really confusing, and you could sort of start to take responsibility for everyone's actions and their effects on you. How do you identify the line between a behavior or action that someone else is doing that you're not appreciating versus, oh, that's another button they're pushing. I need to do some inner work.
An intense, like I said, that's a great question. An intense reaction that you feel from what someone says or does is usually something that requires inner work anyways. But you mentioned something interesting about taking responsibility for someone else's action. We never take responsibility for someone else's action. I only take responsibility for how I feel about what someone did or said. I don't take responsibility for what they said or what they did. But I have the right to create boundaries as well and set boundaries. And that's the thing. A lot of people struggle with setting healthy boundaries and enforcing them, reinforcing these boundaries out of fear. So if someone says something that bothers me, it really depends on the intensity of what it bothers me, how it bothers me. And if you think about it, if you're honest with yourself, you would know, like, that's such an exaggerated feeling that I'm feeling just because of someone saying that word.
Mm-hmm.
So automatically that suggests that you need to do inner work. But there are things that are obvious. I mean, somebody is in a relationship and their partner cheats on them. That's a trauma. Because here's the thing, when you, and just to be clear, that could also be a trigger because the person may have had other people in their life cheat on them. So now this is a creation of a new trauma on top of an existing one, which created a trigger as well. So it's a trigger and a trauma at the same time.
Sure.
That doesn't mean that you do the inner work and keep the person in your life. But you see, if you do the inner work, you can now make a decision as to what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times when emotions go up, intellect goes down. And a lot of people, we know this, you take a step back whenever you feel highly emotional to make a decision, to make a more logical decision. A friend of mine who's the top social engineer in the world, he basically does human hacking for a living, he sent out over 13 million phishing emails.
Oh, okay.
So not fishes, phishing email. A phishing email. Are you familiar with phishing email?
Yes.
Yeah.
But for
So
anyone who's not, can we,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely. A phishing email is basically an email that has content that psychologically manipulates you to clicking a link that basically connects that person that sent you the email to your network, to your computer, to basically hack you.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy basically sent 13 million phishing emails. And he teaches phishing, vishing, which is voice phishing over the phone, and smishing, which is SMSing, basically, and impersonation. And I learned them all. He's a dear friend of mine. I took the basic course and the advanced course. He's one of the unorthodox psychologists that I've learned from. And he basically touches upon things in terms of emotional hijacking, for example. One of the things he talks about is, and this is a story that he shared, you can check him out, Chris Hadnagy. Check out Chris Hadnagy TED Talk. He actually shares this story specifically, where he was phished as he was he was manipulated into it. He was scammed into a phishing email, and this is the guy that teaches it. It's just to show you that no one is safe unless you do this thing, this one thing. You pause. Take some time when you receive an email that makes you emotional, which these emails do. Take a moment to relax. Give yourself a moment to think about it. Wait until your emotions calm down. Wait until you calm down your emotions, reduce in their intensity, and then go back to the email. And now, if it was a phishing email, you will find out. The amygdala hijacking is what he was referring to. Our amygdala is hijacked when we're when our emotions are highly intensified because of something we saw, because of a trigger. And usually they operate based on pleasure or pain, but they really can focus on fear a lot. Like your account in your bank will shut down if you don't click on this link, and they give you a couple things that makes it real. You click on it and you go. The point is, without getting into social engineering, but the point here is to clarify the importance of taking a step back. In this case, with a partner or someone that has wronged you, taking a step back not only allows the emotions to drop, but it allows you to process them in a certain way, because waiting for it to drop, waiting for the emotions to lower in their intensity doesn't mean that they're gone. Which, yeah, this is a very big thing. Just because you stop feeling what you just felt doesn't mean that those feelings go away, which is why the pattern keeps continuing, which is why you're still triggered by the same person or by another person. Does that make sense?
Totally. And it reminds me, I love this notion of taking a beat. And
Yeah.
in my life, it's super important for me to take a pause. If someone says something to me and I have a big reaction to it, I've learned that I'm kind of a slow processor, meaning I need time to think through my thoughts and feelings. I can't quickly respond. If I quickly respond, it will be inaccurate. And so I've learned that's called like your mode of processing. But you have to be disciplined about it. It takes, some discipline to take that pause. And also learning for me how to communicate to people that I need a bit of time and I can't respond right now. I can't give you an answer right now. And respecting that about myself to ask for that time.
That brings up a very interesting point. And I was thinking of this a couple of days ago, selflessness versus selfishness, focusing on self versus focusing on other people. This is a very sticky topic because a lot of people talk about, it's better to be selfless than being selfish. Selflessness is really praised. And I understand the value of that, but people don't realize the ramifications and the consequences of being selfless. The moment you focus on others and you forget about yourself, you are neglecting yourself. The moment you neglect yourself, you create an inner conflict. And it starts to neglecting yourself suggests to the unconscious mind things that you don't want to believe about yourself, that you are less than, that you're not that important. Mm-hmm. And it's not about feeding the ego. It's about giving the body and the mind and the self in general the attention, the love, the connection it needs. We can't fill others with an empty cup. And for people to just focus on serving others without focusing on filling themselves up and feeling guilty about self connection or self-attention, which is something that you can see. People are being attacked for focusing on themselves. Now, only focusing on yourself, that is selfish, that is just feeding the ego. Only focusing on others is neglecting yourself. So where's the balance? What's the solution? When I was thinking about it, I realized that focus equals importance and sustained focus equals dependence. And if I'm focusing on myself, but no one else is, and if I'm focusing on others, then they are important and I'm not, that's a problem because they're both important. Sustained focus equals dependence. If I constantly focus on others and I neglect myself, what ends up happening is I start to develop a dependence on others because it's just other focused all the time, and I end up needing others, fearing the loss of others, desperately seeking their attention, seeking their approval, because all I'm doing is focusing on them, that I neglected myself enough that I can no longer depend on anything but other people. I've tried to serve them so much that now I cannot survive without them. And this is disastrous. The secret here, and this is my question to you, who would you rather depend on, yourself or others?
Myself.
Yourself. Does that mean that you wouldn't need others at some point, that you would need other people's help?
I would absolutely need others.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what if your dependence on yourself was your default, and the dependence on, not dependence on others, but the requirement of other people's help was an exception, was a choice, was not the default? How would you think you would be, how do you think your self-confidence would be, and self-esteem would be, and self-worth, and how would your self-image be? Just out of curiosity.
I do think that I naturally depend on myself. I think that it has its pros and cons. I think one thing that can lead to is I take responsibility for a lot. Everything is because of something I'm creating or I'm doing or I'm manifesting. So I do think that's the one kind of watch out.
Okay, I love that you said that. I love that you said that. The way I'm looking at both is focus on yourself first, to focus on others more effectively, to fill yourself up first. I would say focus on yourself more, but that sustains your focus on others. You're not depleted or drained because you always fill yourself up. You can still be filled up by other people, but it's always a bonus. It's not a necessity to be filled up by others. We've been taught that that's the case. Here's what you said that I love. You talked about control, responsibility. And the first thing I just wrote it down, control. So here's the thing. There's a difference between, and I just posted a quote about this a couple days ago. It may not be my fault, but it is my responsibility. There's a very big difference between something being my fault and something being my responsibility. If I'm depending on myself, then I'm responsible. I take responsibility for everything in my life. That gives me control. Why is that important? Because it's liberating to feel in control. It allows you to no longer be a victim. The moment it's someone else's fault, the moment someone else is responsible for you calming yourself down or the resolution taking place, you are now waiting for the other person to do what they need to do so you can be okay. So someone else now is in control of how you feel, rather than you being completely responsible for how you feel, because we are responsible for how we feel. We cannot control our emotions. We can influence our emotions, but we are responsible for how we feel. We're not responsible for what happens to us.
Mm-hmm.
We are responsible for how we respond to what happens to us. We are responsible for not how we feel about what happens, but keeping that pain. So I'm not responsible for the pain that happened to me. I feel the pain,
Right.
that's okay.
Yep.
But pain turns to suffering, and I'm responsible for that because I'm holding on to the pain. And people, and I mentioned this as well, I guess in one of the videos recently, resentment and guilt, for example. People hold on to guilt to protect others from themselves. And people, just hold on to resentment to protect themselves from others. Mm-hmm. It's like I'm holding on to this pain that is poisoning me to protect myself from the person in front of me. Because I want to remind myself that, of this pain. So I constantly keep a lookout for that person ever repeating it or someone else repeating it. The problem is you live in fear. The problem is if you do this, you will live in reaction, in anticipation of trauma, in anticipation of pain. And just to take it back to control, because again, this is another deep topic in and of itself, but linking that, responsibility is not a burden. If I'm responsible, I can change things. If I'm responsible, I'm in control. I can improve what's happening. I'm paralyzed if someone else is responsible. Now I'm going to wait for them, right? So the key here is control. One of the biggest problems, since we talked about frustration, just to link it to frustration to me is trying to control something you can't. Most people are stressed because they're frustrated because they're trying to control something they can't. What are they trying to control? Time, people, natural disasters, emotions, their technology. They're trying to control something they can't. Now, if you are constantly trying to do something you can never succeed in doing, then you are constantly focusing on failing. How do you think that damages your self-esteem and self-confidence? Because we're constantly trying to control something we can never control. One question I ask myself when I'm stressed, when I'm frustrated, other than doing a process, a journal, a micro process, emotional journaling, which we could talk about, is I ask myself questions that interrupt my pattern. And so one of the things that I ask is, what am I trying to control right now? And I think 100%, I'm trying to think of an example. There is no example coming up. 100% of the time, I'm frustrated or stressed because I'm trying to control something that I can't. And the moment I identify what it is, and I make a conscious decision to accept that I cannot control that, and that's okay. I can still feel safe even though I can't control that. I don't have to feel threatened, right? So that's one thing. My second question is, what can I control right now? And I immediately shift to what can I control in this moment? Type A personalities would organize their desk or rearrange their desk and they feel better because they're focusing on something they can control, right? I can control my decisions. I can control the pictures in my head. I can control my breathing. I can control my movement. I can control my posture. I can control my voice and drop it down. And I can start to relax. You can change just one muscle group and everything else follows. That's how the muscles work for some reason. You slow down one part, you slow down everything else. There's so much you can control. And the moment you do that, what do you feel? In control. What does that make you feel? Competent. What does that make you feel? Safe, which is what we're after from the very beginning. Everything we do is about feeling safe. Not comfortable, safe, because safety and comfort are different. That was a tangent, but I think it was important to share, so yeah.
I think, no, I think you're dropping a lot of wisdom. And what was coming up for me when you were talking about that is wanting to feel in control. Do you think that that's a positive thing that we should seek because it does lead through this pattern of feeling more confident, feeling more safe, getting to a better place? Or should we work to not constantly need to feel in control? When we were talking about taking responsibility, I find that I like to take responsibility. And I think what's underneath that is because that makes me feel like I'm in control. This isn't happening to me. I have manifested this somehow. I have attracted this somehow. This person is behaving this way because of something I did. But if I take responsibility for it all, then I'm in control. And I do question sometimes, maybe that is a coping mechanism as well, this need to feel in control.
You're just triggering a lot of different not emotions, but a lot of different ideas that I want to share. So I'm just jotting them down and they're just not stopping. So I can go off on a tangent here, but I just want to cover something. That's why it's important to establish the things you can control from the things you can't. That's number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, that does not negate the fact that if you feel frustrated, that may be because of a life theme of frustration that has been going on for a long time that needs addressing and it needs emotional processing. The questions I'm asking don't necessarily solve the problem. They shift my focus because mentally, the reason why we are wired to focus on what we cannot control is because we are afraid. There's a sense of threat and we don't know what it is. And we're conditioned constantly to maintain that sense of threat without even knowing. We rush. We're taught to rush. We're taught to be okay with being overwhelmed. But the thing is, we're not designed to be overwhelmed. Multitasking doesn't work. Science has proved, so many studies have proven that. We're depleting our mental energy much faster. Micronutrients in the brain are depleted much faster when you focus on two things at the same time. It is not a healthy thing to do. We're taught to be ADD when we constantly swipe on Reels or TikTok. Not just that, but that's like social media on steroids, constantly swiping for after 15 seconds, seeing something else, more visual stimulation. My issue with that is attention fragmentation and overstimulation. And it is draining. But we are taught to constantly move faster and faster and faster and live in urgency. Rushing suggests to the unconscious mind that there is a consequence that we need to escape. So we constantly live in fear because we're constantly rushing and doing things very, very quickly instead of taking our time. And when we don't have enough time and we have too much to do, we feel compelled through that scenario to rush, and rushing feeds that beast. And we end up living, and that's why we have so much anxiety in the world right now because of that. So just to break that down, or to get back to what I was saying, one, it's about identifying what we can control from what we can't, separating them. Number two, learning to process how we feel regardless of why we feel it, because why you feel doesn't matter. But when it comes to mental focus, it's important to redirect and learn and master that. It can be considered to a degree of coping, but it's also reconditioning. And the issue with self-development in and of itself as an industry is they focus on beliefs and behaviors, not emotions.
Yeah.
Emotions are the glue that keep the belief and behavior in place. If anybody's wondering, why is it hard for me to change my behavior? Why is it hard for me to change the way I think or what I believe? Well, because the emotions are still there. You melt the glue that is keeping the belief and behavior in place, they change automatically. And even if they don't change automatically, you can change them. And when you do change them, the change is more likely to last. Because even now, when people don't work on the emotions, they can focus on changing their behavior and they would succeed. But there's a chance that they would relapse. There's a chance that the behavior that they stopped comes back. There's an emotional wound that they haven't healed that is causing the belief and behavior to remain, because those beliefs and behaviors are an adaptation to an emotional wound that existed. So we need to get rid of that, and then everything changes.
And I love what you're saying, because often in, behavior design and trying to change behavior, what I try and look at is there's an emotional response. There's something that behavior is doing that is serving you. As much as you know it's bad, as much as you want to change it, it is serving you somehow. And so really you kind of have to get outside of yourself and observe and see, okay, how is this serving me? And then look at that. Is that a true belief or is that a false belief? Have I tricked myself?
Yes. And here's the thing. We can analyze And that can be beneficial to a degree. But if we focus on analysis in the existence of something we didn't give ourselves a chance to properly express, an emotion, we kind of get caught up in analysis more than expression. And expression for processing is the way to properly heal and not have to spend such a long time analyzing a trauma for weeks, months, years, dealing with the same, the problem I have with my mom. And you spend, we see that a lot. It's just a constant thing that keeps happening over and over and over. But there's an emotional wound that needs to heal. You heal that, the belief and behavior will change. Just to touch upon something that you also mentioned about control and responsibility. I am not in control of the behaviors or actions of others, and I am not responsible for the actions. So that's one thing. The other is you're right. With everything I just said, acceptance of the things that you're not in control of comes in. And that's what when I was mentioning the question, the moment you identify what you are not in control of, deciding to just accept that you're not in control of it, and that's okay. You were, in terms of thought-provoking, I have to say this, your comeback box is amazing in terms of, talk about thought-provoking, inspirational questions, and it's just, it ties in nicely with what I was talking about and the questions I ask myself, because questions are one of the fastest ways to shift focus in order for us to feel more resourceful and to feel more hopeful and to feel more empowered. And the moment we ask the right question, now we're focusing on resolution instead of conflict. We're focusing on motion instead of paralysis. What are we focusing on? It's usually one or the other. Are you focusing on surviving or thriving, feeling? Are you focusing on the threat that lurks or the safety? And a lot of times people are kind of torn in extremes. But yeah, so I love that about it. And that was one of the things, that was one of the highlights to me. I love the provocation, reflection. We need to reflect more. And it's hard to reflect when we don't have alone time. And we don't have alone time because we're constantly connected to people. And let me ask you this. In terms of emotional pain, can you think of pain in your life that is not linked to a relationship of any kind?
I'm struggling to think of one.
Because emotional pain usually comes from relationships, which again means that emotional pain comes from others, comes from people. Now our reaction to that, we need to own how we feel to release what we have. But emotional pain comes from people. Emotional pain comes from either abuse or neglect, and neglect is a form of abuse. Ghosting, very abusive act to do on, to do to another human being. Abuse could be verbal, nonverbal, physical, or sexual, but it's linked to others. Now, we live at a time where we're constantly exposed to people. We're taught to depend on people by focusing continuously on people through social media, constantly. It's all about the saves, the shares, the likes, the follows. It's all about the people that we're following. It's all about the things that we're constantly exploring online. And if we put that away, we still have our friends that we can see physically, but we're spending time with people. And when we're alone, which is rare now because of social media and how easy it is for us to access people and how easy it is for people to access us, interrupt our time, cause stress because of interruption, distraction, and so forth. And one tip, please switch off notifications of any kind. I don't have a single notification. That in and of itself changed my life emotionally. Yeah, because that in and of itself is a trigger. But the one thing that remains is when we are alone. Right now, the one thing that we still have is connection with other people. When you think of someone else, when you think of the person that has wronged you, the person that has abused you, and you start to trigger that emotion, right? You are spending time with them. when have you ever spent time alone? No digital connection, no mental connection, no physical connection, just alone time to reflect. It's so much harder now.
And that is in part why I built the box and why I made it a tangible thing that wasn't an email or wasn't an app, so that you could disconnect. That
Yeah.
was part of my motivation for making it a physical box. Because I feel like we have a lot of things that help us and ask us to reflect, but they do have a lot of noise around them. You know, if I'm seeing things on social media or in an email that I'm getting or on an app, there's a lot of noise around that.
Absolutely.
And, you know, I just want to, I know I've said this to you before, but I want to say how much I appreciate, you know, you being such a big supporter of the Box Co. and going through the box. For anyone that doesn't know me, I created the Comeback Box, which is a box of self-care for your thoughts and feelings. And I did it to help everyone during quarantine because it's all about reflecting and getting in touch with yourself, reconnecting with yourself and others. And Sam was one of the first people to reach out and connect and say, how can I help? And it was just so lovely. And I just really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure, and I loved the energy and the care that you put into the box, and the personal touch of how it unfolded and the flexibility it provided. I loved it. I loved how it created a ritual when, at that point, I was constantly focusing on multiple things, so I kind of abandoned my daily rituals temporarily.
Mm-hmm,
That
mm-hmm.
was a nice thing to kind of create a ritual for me during that period of time. And yeah, it's something to look forward to every day. And a lot of people don't have something specific that they're looking forward to. I mean, I'm doing work, I'm spending time with family, but
Sure.
something that is just yours, something that's just for you that no one knows about. It's like your little secret for yourself, right? And it created that. And when we had a conversation about that, I was telling you that these are things I loved about it.
Mm-hmm.
It creates that personal aspect of it. And yes, you have videos that you can follow, which is great, which is great. But there's
Yeah.
something about a personal touch in writing, which is, I don't know if we ever had this conversation about books versus movies and my thoughts on that.
No.
Well, if you have a book adaptation to a movie, there's only one exception as to how a movie was actually better. But in most cases, they prefer the book over the movie. It's always better, right? One main reason is that a book unleashes your creativity. A movie doesn't. When I watch a
Mm-hmm.
movie adaptation from a book, especially let's say it's a fantasy or sci-fi, what it does is allows me to witness the creativity of someone else. And I'm contained now. It's just restricted. I'm just watching what they have imagined. But when you give me a book and I'm reading it, it allows me to imagine the world. You're giving me the ingredients to paint the universe, to paint the characters and how they look like. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how they look like, but based on what you're sharing, I have freedom to imagine it and create it. And it makes a very strong, impactful personal experience that movies would never, ever come close to because movies don't allow creativity for the viewer. You're more passive, but there's a creative aspect and an active aspect of reading a book. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's ever going. And one thing about your box is that it has that. You go through that journey. It's your personal experience and it unleashes your creativity in addition to the opportunity to reflect. So,
Oh, well, I'm so glad.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to hear you say that. And it is designed in that order to start with reflection, but then in that second week, move into what do I want to create? Whether it's a project, a plan, a goal, a plan towards a goal, because I do believe reflection is amazing, but getting into action is where you really feel that confidence and sense of accomplishment because you're setting out to do something and then you're doing it. So thank you so much. And I know you brought it to the UK. And while you're,
I have it with me right here.
oh, you have it with you?
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
I'm just,
I'll
while
tell
you're
people
on your own.
just for them to see it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. I love what you did with it. It's quite a beautiful, which makes me think we need to do something. We did kind of touch upon that unboxing emotional healing. That would be great to do a box, definitely at some point.
Yes.
Yeah.
This was my first box, the comeback box, but my mission is really to make self-growth approachable, attractive, affordable. And after being a strategist for many years, what I'm trying to do is take any overwhelming life milestone or mystery and unbox it, meaning break it down into simple steps and that are designed in a certain order. And that's what the box is all about. Like, do you have 5 minutes a day? So I would love to talk to you about a whole box that's around unboxing emotional healing. It's a really important topic.
Absolutely. I mean, if you are emotionally healed, what are the possibilities to change your beliefs, to change your behaviors, to be able to connect with people on a deeper level, learn whatever you want to learn effortlessly, with complete focus, to be able to enjoy every experience in your life and achieve things, complete tasks, be so productive because nothing is getting in the way. You're no longer holding something, carrying it unnecessarily that is weighing you down. And one thing that you just mentioned is that you constantly focus on unboxing something that is very complicated. That's pretty much what I've been doing for the mind for quite a while after I left. So we are aligned with that, definitely. And yeah, I would love to. And we will definitely talk about this further. Definitely.
Sure. I mean, I remember the first time I spoke to you, I think we were on for maybe 3 or 4 hours. And I just felt like immediately we were kindred spirits. And I love and respect all the work that you're doing. And thank you so much.
Likewise.
And I've been trying to focus on you, but I've also seen some of the comments coming in, and people are just talking about how much they have learned today and appreciate this conversation. And so I just wanted to make sure you saw that as well. And I want to thank everyone who's joined today and been contributing. Sam, I want to be respectful of your time. Is there anything that you wanted to share or talk about today that we didn't get to?
I mean, I think we covered a lot, and there's a lot more to cover, but we're talking about 3-4 hours. So I would rather not open that beautiful Pandora's box at the moment. But yeah, I think we've covered a lot. There is one thing, though, that I think would be important.
Okay.
For anyone that's watching, and this is something you can do, anyone can do. And I've mentioned this on Clubhouse sessions, and I'm going to mention it now because I think it's really important as a takeaway. Whenever you feel any emotion that you'd rather not feel from any situation, if you remember something, if you are with someone, or if something just happened, depending on the intensity, but I'm talking about anything, one thing that you can do to very quickly lower the emotional intensity, and this is based on a lot of studies. Well, it's not based on a lot of studies, let me correct that. There's a lot of studies related to that, but what I've come across was not something that was linked to those studies, but I made the connection. In terms of emotional expression specifically, they do emotional writing, but what I'm after is a specific formula to help lower that. When you remember something, just write down, when I think about blank, whatever it is, and then you go for, I can feel blank. I can feel blank. And you keep going. Repeat the same sentence. Don't say, I can feel frustrated. When I think about that time when that person said this, I can feel resentful, angry, afraid. No. I can feel resentful. I can feel angry, I can feel frustrated. You keep going until there's nothing more. What you just did is you did a micro process. What you just did is you captured emotions that I guarantee you, elements of them, if you keep doing this on a regular basis, you're going to find a cluster of emotions that keep repeating over and over, no matter what's going on. These are a hint that these would be emotional life themes. And I'm going to unravel that further on Clubhouse sessions and Instagram. But it's important to write down how you feel or say it out loud. But I highly recommend writing it down because most people don't. And that gives you a journal of the emotions that you constantly feel. And what it does, and there was a study with Dr. Lieberman, if I'm not mistaken, at UCLA, where writing down how you feel about anger increases the activity of the prefrontal, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for emotional processing, and it massively reduces the activity of the amygdala, which is the part of the brain responsible for threat detection. So you reduce the sensitivity of the amygdala, the activity, and you increase emotional processing. And you start to feel better because your nervous system is integrating what's happening. And this is a simple way to do it. The formula that was presented in the study is not as concentrated as it needed to be. This is a simplistic approach, but it is extremely powerful. And what I'd recommend at the end of it is an exaggerated breathing for like 5 or 7 breaths.
Okay.
5 to 7 times. What that does is it initiates and accelerates the integration of what you just did with your emotions. And this is something you can use, anyone can use. You can do this verbally or writing, but I prefer playing with both, but focus on writing because most people don't. That's it.
I love it. And real quick, can you say the formula again? When I
think about blank, I can feel blank, I can feel, and so forth. One thing to add, just stick to that, because a good rule of thumb is why you feel doesn't matter. How you feel is everything. There's no point in analyzing, because a lot of people spend a lot of time in therapy analyzing, and it doesn't help as much as it could if you just express how you feel, because that's the thing that releases it. It's not the analysis. Knowing why you feel doesn't change the fact that you are feeling it. But when you express it, automatically you start to integrate and dissolve the emotions that have been trapped for years.
Right.
And this is a micro process, not an actual process. There's a deeper process, but this is something anyone can use without guidance. Anyone can do. And don't fall into the trap of explaining. A lot of people will start, when I take them through it, they're like, okay, I can feel resentful because that person did this, how dare they, and they get caught up in the why. No. Stick to how you feel, forget about why you feel. And that's the training that we need to do to really release the emotions that have been trapped for decades.
I think that's so powerful. I'm definitely going to do it. And a lot of people have been asking if we're going to save this conversation. Yes, I will be posting it to the Boxco story. And I believe Sam will be posting it as well. But don't worry, you're not going to lose all this amazing information. But real quick about that formula, what I think is so powerful is, I don't know if you remember the day in the box called Thoughts Are Not Feelings. And that was a big distinction that I learned. And I think it was 30 before someone shared that with me, that there's a difference between thoughts and feelings. And I'm a strategist, I'm a thinker. If I started paying attention to my language, where I would say, if I was trying to express my feelings, I would say, I'm confused. I don't understand. I don't know why it was all in my head. And I really had to create the distinction of, okay, those are not my feelings, and how do I move down? And so this exercise that you just gave, I think it's so beautiful, because you start with, when I think about, I feel, and you very much start to tear the two apart.
Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely. And one thing to touch upon with that is our thoughts, especially for something that bothers us, stem from the emotions that are there. Our mind is coming up with something to rationalize why this happened and so forth. So you deal with the emotion, the thoughts won't be there to begin with because you would have released them. And something about I am confused. What's interesting is when you say I am confused versus I feel or I can feel. And by the way, if you ever shift in the exercise to truly feeling it so strongly, or if something happened at the moment right now, you can't say when I think about it because it just happened. You just jump into I feel. It's not something you can feel. It's important to be honest and truthful. Is it something you can feel or something you feel? But the difference between I feel and I feel angry and I am angry, is you just, with I am angry, you just defined yourself by your emotion. So if you want to get rid of the emotion, you need to get rid of yourself, because you just can, how can you get rid of something you are defined by? But when you say I feel, you are not detaching, but you are separating who you are from how you feel, instead of who you are being how you feel with the I am angry phrasing. Very different, very important.
That's a great distinction. Great distinction.
Thank you.
So I could keep going. I could talk to you forever, but I know you're a very busy man. So I just want to say thank you for, everything you do. And I don't know if you're seeing in the comments, so many people are just appreciating this conversation and sending a lot of good vibes to us. So thank you, everyone. And we'll talk again soon, Sam. Let's do this again.
Absolutely. And thank you, Leah, for having me. It was an absolute pleasure and an honor to be here. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Your presence is what gives us power, and your support. Everybody here that has been following me on Instagram, every audience member, you're the reason why I'm still doing this. And the reaction, the response, and everything is what keeps us happening. So thank you so much for that. And I look forward to more. I look forward to giving more. And hopefully you will find the content that I continue to share useful and valuable. Thank you.
Oh, we will. Oh, we will. Okay, thank you again, Sam. Everyone have a magical, beautiful day, and we'll talk again soon.
Looking forward to it. Take care.
Bye, friend.